Hello, I am Suzanne Greenberg, the President and CEO for Can Council Great Lakes Bay Region. We have programming through our Children's Advocacy Center, our CASA program, which stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates, as well as our prevention education programming serving Saginaw and Bay County.
Hi, I'm Jessica Gregory, Prevention and Outreach Specialist for the Bay Area Women's Center, serving victims of domestic violence and sexual assault in Bay County and Aranet County.
And I'm Cindy Howell. I'm the Victim Rights Coordinator for Bay County. I work in the Bay County Prosecutor's Office. We'd like to welcome you to our program today. We're going to talk a little bit about Crime Victims' Rights Week. And prior to 1985, the victims of crime didn't have any rights. They came to court and testified if they were needed, but other than that, they didn't know what was going on with their case. And there are a lot of crimes that are committed that people are completely devastated by. There's child abuse, there's sexual assault, there's domestic violence, there are assaults, breaking and enterings, malicious destruction of properties. Some of those may seem like very serious crimes, and some of them may seem like not so serious crimes. But when you are the victim of that crime, that's when it becomes very serious to you. And back in 1985, Senator William Van Rigglemorter decided that we needed to recognize victims of crime, and we need to give them some opportunities to participate in the court system. And so he introduced legislation that was passed for Michigan for the Crime Victims' Rights Act. And that act came into effect in 1985, as I said. In 1988, it was decided by the communities of Michigan that we should have a constitutional amendment that provided these rights to victims. So not only is it a law in the state of Michigan, but we are one of the few states in the United States that has a Crime Victims' Rights constitutional amendment. So we're very fortunate here in Michigan. Other states have used Michigan for their crime victims' rights legislation and are pushing for crime victims' rights constitutional amendments in their states and for the United States of America. We're still waiting on that. We are celebrating this month the Crime Victims' Rights Awareness. And we wanted to just give you a little bit of information that of help that was available to crime victims in Bay County. In our office, in the prosecutor's office, we provide victims' rights to anyone who has become the victim of a crime. And so that means if you are the victim of somebody slashing your tires or breaking out your window or breaking into your home, or you've been a sexual assault victim, we help you through the court system. That's what we do. And then the victims' rights advocates in the prosecutor's office will attend court with you. We will notify you of every time there's a court hearing. And the victims have the right to be in court every time a defendant is in court. So we've been very fortunate in Bay County to have strong leadership in victims' rights. Started out with Joe Sheeran when he was the prosecutor, and he was able to bring in more than just a part-time victim advocate. We now have 3 victim advocates, and then continuing on with Kurt Asbury, who is now our elected prosecutor. This year's theme for Crime Victims' Rights Week is engaging communities and empowering victims. In Bay County, we have organizations that specialize in assisting specific crime victims, like child abuse, Suzanne, and sexual assault, Suzanne and Jessica. Mm-hmm. And so, Suzanne, why don't you tell us a little bit about how the Can Council assists crime victims in Bay County?
Oh, thank you, Cindy. Our Children's Advocacy Center serves our smallest victims and works with children who've experienced severe physical abuse, sexual abuse, or who have witnessed violence. And just for some perspective in the community, in our most recent numbers that we have through the Department of Human Services, there were 2,709 children in investigated families. Of those families, there were 366 confirmed victims, and 111 children who were removed from their homes and lived in out-of-home care. So those numbers are extremely startling, and it's important for you to know that our Children's Advocacy Centers work with a multidisciplinary team, including the prosecutor, law enforcement, and protective service workers, so that we can have the child come and tell us what's happened to them one time. This is really focused on reducing the trauma to the child who has been victimized. So from our smallest children, from 2 and 3 years old to 18-year-old children, we're able to have them come in a safe and friendly environment so that they're able to talk about this horrific thing that's happened to them one time. It's important for you also to know that last year we served 450 children. So this is not something that is it's not something that doesn't happen here in Bay County, and we want you to know that we're grateful for the support that you all give to our programs, both of our programs, and know that we couldn't do this without you, but we are honored to serve these children because otherwise they need to tell their story multiple times in varied places like hospitals and back of police cars and so on. We also are bringing a program called CASA to Bay County, it stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates. Currently there are 111 children living in out-of-home care. All of those children would be eligible for a CASA volunteer to be their voice in the system once they've been removed from their home or are now a ward of the court. So we look forward to having individuals step up and be volunteers for that program. But we're glad that we can serve the victims in that way. So.
Thank you, Suzanne. And then Jessica, you're from the Women's Center. And what I think is really interesting is how much the Advocacy Center, the Women's Center, and the Prosecutor's Office collaborate in many, many areas. So we have a sexual assault response team. We have the team from the Advocacy Center with the Yes, go ahead.
It reminded me that when we have an interview of a child, we have a highly trained forensic interviewer who does that interview, then the team that I described, law enforcement and the protective service person, and sometimes the prosecutor will decide whether or not there's going to be a medical examination of the child, and it's the sexual assault nurse examiners here in Bay County who do those exams, and they are through the Bay Area Women's Center. We are really collaborating, and also in our prevention efforts here in the community. So it's really nice to have such a strong partnership.
And that doesn't happen in a lot of communities, the collaboration. There's a lot of sometimes inward fighting between, the agencies, but not in Bay County. We haven't had that. We've been very, very fortunate in Bay County. Jessica, tell us a little bit about what the Women's Center does to help victims of, the different kinds of crimes, domestic violence and the sexual assault.
Absolutely. Well, as we already talked about with our Crime Victims' Rights Week this year, the theme is engaging communities and empowering victims, and that's what our services are all about. We've talked about our collaborative efforts and how important that is in getting our community involved, but also the empowerment piece. We work with victims of domestic violence and victims of sexual assault who sometimes don't have any place to turn. And just to put this in perspective, to help out a little bit, statistics say about 1 out of every 3 families in the United States experiences some form of abuse. Abuse within the family, abuse in relationships within the family. And we see clients on a regular basis coming through who experience all types of abuse, from the child abuse that we've already talked about. Animal abuse plays a part. And then, of course, relationship abuse, domestic violence. And so to that end, our services include an emergency crisis line, a 24-hour crisis line, which in 2013 fielded 1,555 calls for service, coming out to about 463 hours of phone counseling alone. In addition to that, something that a lot of folks in our community are familiar with is our residential services or our shelter service. It's an emergency service for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault who need a safe haven, who need a safe place to go in that emergency situation. We operate a 32-bed emergency shelter, so our capacity is 32 people in one night, and we stay pretty full on a regular basis, and that just shows the need in our community. A lot of folks don't come to shelter. And that's okay too, but they might use other services. And we have counseling services, advocacy programs, support groups for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. And of course, we've talked a little bit as well about the SANE program, the Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner program, which provides a free exam for anybody in our community who's been sexually assaulted or raped, adults and children, as an emergency service to meet the needs of victims on an immediate basis, and then again collaborating with our community organizations.
Again, we are very fortunate to have the people that we have in our community. I didn't want to end this program without talking about our little Dodger. A lot of you know who Dodger is. Dodger is our canine advocate, and he works with the prosecutor's office, and he goes to court with the children, and he makes everybody's day much, much better. And so we are going to provide a chance for you to meet Dodger and to meet these ladies here on Wednesday, April 29th. We're going to have a crime victims' rights rally at City Hall, Bay City Hall, and we will be presenting at that time the Bay County Prosecutors Community Awareness Awards. We try to do this once a year during Crime Victims' Rights Week, and what we do is try to recognize people in the community who have made a difference in the lives of crime victims. And this year, it's a surprise who it's going to be, but if you'll be there, I think you will be very surprised at the people who we have chosen. Past recipients have been Prime Brothers Furniture. They donated furniture to a family whose girls had been sexually abused. We've had George's Auto, he fixed cars for women who were in the shelter. We've had ladies who have sewn gowns for the Child Advocacy Center for the sexual assault exams, so the medical exam gowns, they sewed for them. So there are many, many people that we've recognized, regular citizens who just did their duty and called 911 when they saw that there was a problem. At this time, we'd like to share a video with you provided by the National Center for Victims of Crime.
Anybody can be a victim of a violent crime.
Not feeling valued by the institutions that are supposed to be serving you, like the police department, the criminal justice system, the education system, perpetuates a sense of hopelessness.
It's extremely important to get out and spread the word that there is help, there's hope, there's support.
Each and every one of us can do things every day in our relationships, in our families, in our workplace.
It takes all of us together, not just one agency, one shelter, one program. We need a continuum of services so that we can meet victims wherever they are.
In Philadelphia, trauma was really at the center of what was happening in the lives of victims of violence. We have focused on the issue of trauma as it relates to urban violence, particularly for young people of color.
Trauma-informed care is really recognizing how chronic stress, exposure to violence has an impact on a person's behavior. All of those things feed back into that cycle of violence. Healing Hurt People is a hospital-based violence intervention program. The young people that we work with, they've been shot, stabbed, or assaulted.
People in this room, everyone in this room is at a different stage of healing.
We have worked to identify some of the gaps in victim services for the young people. And the sad part about it is that our young people don't really know all of the resources that are available to them.
Many of these young people have been viewed as bad. Rather than having been injured by trauma, we're taking a broader perspective and seeing these young people in the same way that we would see anyone else who's been a victim of violence.
I love Los Angeles. We are a vibrant, vibrant community. We are survivor-centric. What we try to do is, as a leadership organization, create environments so that people can talk about the roots of violence and engage with one another.
When we're working with domestic violence survivors, understanding that if a person's reporting for the first time, if a survivor's holding back, not being forthcoming with a lot of the details, it's not that they're lying, it's that they've been through a traumatic experience.
A group of deaf women came to our organization because they were concerned about privacy. We started a program that dealt with sexual and domestic violence for the deaf community and people with disabilities, very much targeted for them, aimed at their needs.
We're here to provide those options and resources so that survivor then has that power within themselves to move forward and start their healing process.
From every disaster comes a silver lining. And I think Hurricane Katrina was an opportunity for New Orleans to get some things right.
New Orleans, unfortunately, has this history of education systems that didn't really address those needs of kids who are chronically exposed to community violence.
We get children and families who have experienced homicides, children who have been victims of abuse, sexual abuse. And if they don't get any type of support or treatment for the trauma, it will continue to impact them throughout their lives.
We do a tremendous amount of outreach to every entry point that we think that survivors will be going to let them know that services are available for them. The important thing is that you get those systems, police, the city, the mayor, the prosecutor, your nonprofits, to really understand that we have to have an integrated response.
The partnerships are vital so we can meet the needs of the entire community, so we can grow together.
It's the building of the trust and the belief that we are going to walk that walk with them. Through word of mouth, a reputation is just created, and Sahara is viewed in the community as one of those organizations that never says no. Recent immigrants experience a vast difference between the culture that they are used to and the culture in this country. That frustration sometimes gets expressed as anger and ultimately violence. They can target easily their spouses and their families because there probably won't be a complaint.
When English is not a first language, the system just becomes that much more difficult to navigate. Telling the story to someone that's genuinely listening and not questioning them, or they don't have to prove themselves, that's very empowering.
That's good.
We are listening not only with our ears, but with our hearts. Without that, there would be a lot of victims that stay silent.
Empowering victims means acknowledging them and their humanity.
As humans, we are social beings, and we do best when we are in healthy families, healthy communities.
Working together, we have a collective impact. When you're empowering victims, you're giving them hope. Hope in themselves and hope in their future.
In recognition of Crime Victims' Rights Week, throughout the month of April, you're going to see lots of community awareness materials, placemats, coasters throughout the community, helping to raise awareness. And education and awareness is very important in our efforts. Suzanne, could you talk a little bit about what else folks in our community can do to assist with victims of crime?
Absolutely. You know, the Can Council utilizes over 350 volunteers to get our work done, and those volunteers can help with everything from putting together the community awareness materials that we provide, as well as becoming CASA volunteers. So it can have everywhere from hour a month to 20 hours a month, and we welcome and appreciate those volunteers tremendously, as I know you do as well. And one of the ways that people can also get involved is to step up if they do, as Cindy said, if they see something, to say something. And there is a special number that if you see a child or an animal or anyone in imminent danger, of course, please call 911. But if you see a child and you're concerned about child abuse and neglect and you'd like to make that report, there is a special number that you can call, which is 855-444-3911. And we really appreciate you stepping up and making that call, because we need to be that voice for children.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think that something else that's really important that we do at both of our organizations, Suzanne, is prevention, community outreach, education for young people is really key to ending crime against people. So we encourage anybody in our communities to call either of our organizations to come in and do educational presentations for groups in an educational setting, in a church setting, things like that. And I know that the prosecutor's office does some cool things with Dodger out in the community too.
That's true. We have visited a lot of schools. We've come to a lot of events. Dodger likes to show off when he does come to events. He wears his tie usually. So the kids love to see him. And we use that with Judge Joe Sheeran in the schools to teach kids about coming to court so that they're not scared about coming to the courthouse. And so we'd like to thank you for joining us today. We hope that you've learned a lot about what is offered in our community to help crime victims. And we hope you've also learned that even if you are not a crime victim, you can certainly be instrumental in supporting and empowering crime victims. And we appreciate the people who have stepped up to the plate. If you are interested in helping anyone, any victims of crime, if you want to call me at 895-4185, we can give you the numbers to the Advocacy Center and to the Women's Center, because we all do work together. And together, we can help empower victims.
And again, we welcome you to join us on Wednesday, April 29th at noon at City Hall on Washington Avenue for the Crime Victims' Rights Rally.
See you there.
Thank you.